Literally, of course, the moment we start recording, my dogs are like trying to wrestle. You were both sleeping a second ago.
They heard you say anal fissures during our countdown, and we're like, that's our cue to wake up and fight.
Pretty much. Let's hop into it.
Guys, we had a blast writing last week's episode, and we wanted to share a few things that filtered through our YouTube and our Instagram comments. First off, we talked briefly about an alternate for Horus as Primarch in our last episode, and we posted that as a short, and many of you watched that, and a ton of you guys commented. You guys had so many thoughts on this. It ended up generating 46, almost 47,000 views, almost 2,000 likes, and almost 200 comments. About 170 plus is what we ended up coming in as. So you guys loved this.
I actually trimmed down the comments number because we had replied to a couple of people, so I wanted to take that into consideration.
Sure
Yeah,
thing.
170 rough comments. A lot of people had a lot to say. Some of you writing with a very butthurt tone right out the gate. So that's why we're here, is to keep everything civil. I think one of the most interesting reasons that people gave for some of your more wild picks was for lore reasons. And then they just kind of like explained away whatever they wanted to choose for whoever they wanted for War Master. A lot of you guys basically saying that because it was predicted or foreseen that the War Master was going to be attempted to be corrupted by chaos, you took that into consideration, not necessarily that they would have been a good War Master. So I thought that was an interesting perspective to take. There was also one person who actually had a really good take, so we're going to feature that comment here from @BigMatthew. Basically, they said, I think Lorgar should have been the War Master because they would have been eventually corrupted, and then we could have brought down the force of 17 legions upon them and gotten them destroyed. So this one person really doesn't like Lorgar.
Oh, Lorgar would have been destroyed. It's like, what, 3 separate occasions in the Horus Heresy that he absolutely gets beat down by the other Primarchs, some of which who are on his side.
Yes.
Like one of them, they're in like a meeting. This is after the legions had split. So the Horus Heresy had officially begun, and I can't remember which Primarch, but like Lorgar like kind of mouths off about something, and one of the traitor Primarchs basically like decides to like almost kill him, like right there and then. I want to say it was Perturabo, but I can't remember which one.
It might have been, but again, I don't remember and haven't read that book in a long enough time to remember that specific detail. Another user suggested something interesting. They suggested a triumvirate. User @JacobEvan489 suggested that Horus, RG, and the Lion should have all taken up a cumulative role as War Master. And I thought that was very interesting, considering the fact that all of them have different takes on leadership styles. They could have fit well into other roles. So I really like that. Probably one of my favorite comments comes from Lessie13. Angron, on strategy, just attack, be happy. Just go nuts. Or excuse me, Angron, one strategy, just attack, be merry. So I really like that. Super simple, to the point. And also, a few people even mentioned Angron because he would have just been the War Master, like that would have been his title, and then the other duties of the Imperium could have been delegated out. So I actually really like that.
Angron would have been a terrible pick. Like, I'm not trying to say anything about the particular intelligence of the people who thought that. I also think Angron is sort of a meme answer. You're like, who do you want to lead your armies? I don't know, maybe the most unhinged person amongst the 18. No, Angron would have been comical. Still better than Lorgar. Actually, I would say magnitudes better than Lorgar. Because gosh, he sucks. Lorgar's such a bitch.
Based on Big Matthew's response, he was actually the only person that said Lorgar should have been the War Master, literally for the reason so he could be corrupted by chaos and then annihilated from the face of the galaxy. That's essentially why he was chosen. If it was not for that immediate plug to kill Lorgar, he got an absolute goose egg in the comments. So
that's
to give you guys a quick overview, we got about 87 coherent responses for suggestions of who you guys thought would have been a good War Master. In that first place spot, I think everyone was like pretty okay with this, was the Lion. He got 20 responses of people saying, yep, I want the Lion to be in there. Next in second place, only 2 behind the line, was Sanguinius. And I really like this answer because Sanguinius was actually stated by Horus, and many of you pointed this out, that Horus thought Sanguinius should have taken it because of his regalness. Like, it wasn't necessarily, he was looking beyond the fact that like his like he may not have been like the best strategist, even though he was a great attacking commander. He was fantastic, but he was going to be a great leader of the Imperium. And a few of you got really, really butthurt about this and actually like went into the comments and literally disagreed with everyone who said Sanguinius. And I read all those comments. The butthurt was real from like one individual. So I thought that was kind of funny.
It's a little interesting that some people get so upset over Warhammer lore. Like, we asked a hypothetical question about a fantasy universe, and there's definitely a couple individuals who are like, and I took that personally.
Absolutely. In our third place spot, we actually got Dorn with 8 votes. I thought that was like pretty interesting because he's a pretty good commander. I think he's fairly well rounded. So I was actually surprised he didn't get more than this, but there's a huge gap between Lion and the Angel, but then to Dorn and everybody else. After Dorn, we actually only got 7 of you guys. 7 out of 87 said that Roboute Guilliman should have been the War Master. Too many of you guys were like, he's too soft. And that was it. Just very few people who had thought that should have been the pick for War Master.
A very common theme we saw in the comments was he's a statesman, not a war master. Like, we need somebody who is going to have an equal amount of statesmanship, but master that with a level of strategy and ruthlessness that Roboute Guilliman just can't muster. Horus grew up on a world of criminals and gang violence, and that really shaped him into the person he became. Like, he was extremely likable. Everyone loved him and flocked to him. And it's for that reason that, like, when he flipped that switch from I'm going to make peace to I'm going to make war, that it was, it ended up being short conflicts for the most part in the Great Crusade. It's like, okay, you're not gonna join us, then die. Moving on, we had, so this is the bottom of the barrel. You guys didn't out of the remaining primarchs, we didn't really see a lot of representation from these guys. We got 6 votes for the Khan. This is the White Scars Primarch. Yeah, I agree with this placement. 6 votes out of 87. He's very aloof. For most of the Great Crusade, people are like, hey, does anyone know where the Khan is? And even the Emperor's like, I have no idea.
Yeah, no clue.
I have no idea where he is. And then coming in at 5 votes apiece, we had Perturabo, Vulcan, and Ferrus Manus, which is interesting because you said Vulcan would have been your pick for War Master.
Along with my second pick of Purdy, so very few people agreed with me, but the few people that did had pretty good reasoning. I will say on your earlier point, the people who said Khan, most of the comments that said him literally just said Khan. That was it. No explanation, just like, we want the fast boy, and that was it. Very little explanation. Very interesting.
In and out with, they're like, I'm not here to stay, which seems very White Scars.
Indeed.
They're like, I'm not here to stay. I'm going to post this comment as fast as frick, boys. So at almost the very, very bottom, I'm a little surprised that Leman Russ only got 3 votes. I actually think the Great Wolf would have been a pretty decent War Master. He is a very good combatant. He's a little bit more on the unhinged side, maybe more than just a little, but I feel like his role as like the Emperor's executioner would have evolved into War Master in a very natural way. Like, towards the end of the Great Crusade, with like the conflicts on, and especially murder, I think the wolves would have done really well because the Emperor's children basically get their butts handed to them, along with some of the Blood Angels, who are some of the most ruthless fighters in the Imperium. Russ would have done great. It seems like he would have been the exact person, although Horus did come in and basically cleaned up the entire conflict, saving those 2 legions and everything.
Interestingly enough, I actually disagree. I think like him being at the bottom of the barrel here seems pretty accurate. I think Russ is best used as a tool in the hands of others, not the actual leader of the Imperium.
He basically is a sort of like a wind-up murder toy. You wind him up, you point him in a direction, and watch him just do his murder thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in the Horus Heresy, when he tries to attack the vengeful spirit, he kind of gets his cheeks clapped. He does not do well.
He does, yeah. He goes in there with his teeth bared and then gets curb stomped a little bit. Doesn't he like get his back broken, or am I thinking of someone different?
Yeah, you're thinking of somebody different.
Oh,
You're
I'm
thinking
thinking
of
of.
Magnus specifically at the hands of Russ.
Oh, right. So Russ, yes, a different back was being broken by Russ.
Yes, Russ was still involved though.
Okay, if I keep saying back broken too many times, I'm going to say something inappropriate. Anyway, at the very bottom of the barrel, these, so tied for last, these make 100% sense.
Not tied for last. There's an additional thing below.
Am I looking at the, do I need to look at the next? Interesting. Okay, so tied for second to last, Conrad Kurz. Either the people who put Conrad Kurz know exactly how crazy of an option that would be. They're like, this is funny. He's insane. He's Conrad Kurz, even before he fell to chaos, felt like he fell to chaos. He was so evil.
Based on the comments for Kurz, this was a chaos pick. This was like maximum destruction. We're not actually looking for efficiency. Same with the next one as well.
Yeah, Kurz, and then, like we said, Engron, same reason. These two Primarchs, of course they fell to chaos. They basically just needed no convincing whatsoever. They're like, do you want extra power? And they're like, can we kill people, specifically civilians? Then yes, absolutely. We'll turn to chaos.
Yeah, 100%. They were bad boys.
And then tied with Kurz and Angron with 2 votes out of 87 was Alfarius, which makes total sense. The Alpha Legion their purpose is not to be at the head of the Imperium and the Great Crusade. They are meant to literally be in the shadows and to be a force unseen, moving around, killing people in the shadows. What is the word I'm looking for? Spy tactics and
subterfuge, espionage.
Espionage. Thank you. I'm like, it's too freaking early. I haven't had my coffee enema yet. Gross.
Then in last place, guys, we have 4 different entries. One of these isn't even a Primarch, but 4 different entries that all only got 1 vote, which was Magnus, Fulgrim, Lorgar, and Elanius Pius.
Fascinating choice.
No explanation either on that last one. I don't know.
Huh.
Who knows? Lots of features here, guys, but really what stands out here is that the Lion and the Sanguinius were the overwhelming responses, and everyone else basically got to pick up the change.
Featured on our Instagram, excuse me, I want to redo that. One comment we really wanted to bring into the light, we actually had a comment that explained a little bit about some of the missing legions, which we talked about in last week's episode. And we had a comment from the Rage Cage that said this: my headcanon is that one of the missing legions was killed off and or broken up and mixed into the legions, not just the Smurfs, and that the other legions is actually the Carcharodons. The missing Primarchs are sometimes referred to as the Forgotten and the Purged. I think one Primarch had to be purged and the other was missing somewhere outside the known galaxy, and the Emperor entrusted the Legion of the Missing Sun to search for him in the dark reaches outside of our galaxy. And my tinfoil hat theory is that Tiberos, how do you pronounce that?
You got it.
Is that Tiberos the Red Wake is said Primarch. But again, that is my tinfoil hat crazy theory.
I actually love this fan theory, so thank you to the Rage Cage over on Instagram for sharing. I actually did message this person and ask if it was okay if we shared this on the podcast. I have a lot to say on this, so we're actually going to forgo our opening questions as we continue to talk about stuff we kind of saw throughout social media from last week's episode.
And if you guys have comments that are insightful and interestingly enough, we will feature them on the podcast. So thank you, the Rage Cage. We really appreciate you.
So one of my first thoughts is, if you don't know, the Carcharodons, aka the Space Sharks, are a Space Marine chapter that is rumored actually to be a Raven Guard successor chapter. But in all places where I saw this, it was basically asterisks with a giant, we're actually not sure, because there's no specific timing of this chapter's founding. They basically, from what I saw in the wiki, is they were like, hey, it could go all the way back to the second founding, which was the original split from Legion into chapters, or all the way to the 23rd founding. So there's a huge gap in between here. And they're like, we actually don't know because everything's a little murky, no pun intended.
You could say the waters were a little muddy.
They have no idea. Exactly. Stop it. I'm going to smack you. So I think this is interesting because the Space Sharks don't really have a lot of history to them. No one really knows. But I think it's interesting that they're rumored to be the Raven Guard successor chapter because the Space Sharks are known for specifically losing their grip on reality and going into a bloodlust while fighting, a la Bruce from Finding Nemo.
Oh, that's good.
So that to me doesn't really make sense for the Raven Guard. That's not a characteristic that the Raven Guard have. They're much more like stealthy and like subterfuge ridden, things like that. And I'm like, this doesn't.
That's a Blood Angels trait. That is 100.
It does. It feels more like Blood Angels than it does anything else. So again, I think the idea that they're rumored to be a Raven Guard successor chapter is kind of a red herring.
Or the nails are biting.
No, I don't think they're. I don't think they're world eaters. But I think the nails specifically make them terrible. The world eaters are a product of Angron being absolutely horrible, not necessarily them just being rage infused.
Ugh, Angron is so petty.
Indeed. My second point is in reference to the legions being absorbed, I think Rage Cage has it right. I think the other legions did get spread across most of the legions, as we said in last week's episode, but I would like to further clarify that I think the Ultramarines did end up getting the lion's share of new recruits, no pun intended. Sub point, I bet the Dark Angels actually didn't get too many recruits from these other legions because at this time they were still so secretive and there couldn't be too many outsiders knowing things about Caliban and Luther, etc. You know?
They're like, hey, do you want these extra troops? And they're like, actually, we're good. No one's allowed in here. Like, it basically, the Dark Angels had like their own little fort and they're like, no girls allowed. Except for it was like, no outside Marines allowed. And you just hear bolter fire from the inside. Like, what's going on in there? Nothing.
We're just going to let them do their thing. My third point or third thought on this is that the formal censure and erasure, that word is always hard for me to say. I even practiced that word after I was writing it, and I still messed it up. Yep. From official records is known as the Edict of Obliteration. So cool. Also called the Damnatio Memorae, a High Gothic phrase meaning condemnation from memory. Oh my gosh, the dogs are zooming. Can you hear them?
Nope.
Oh, cool. Even Sanguinius gives a moment of trepidation when he's talking to Horus when Horus discovers the Red Thirst. It was considered to be a blight upon the Legion, and there was precedent that the brothers knew about for extinguishing entire legions.
Right.
The Warhammer 40k wiki does specifically call out a, quote, forgotten one as the former leader of the Carcharodons who sent them out into the void. I really want to do an episode on Space Sharks now.
I feel like we have to do an episode on Space Sharks.
Space Sharks!
Which means I have like 6 more library books to check out.
Oh no.
I cannot tell you how many books I checked out and am in the process of reading just to do these lore episodes. It's almost all of what I did on vacation was read books.
Oh, yeah, I'm right there with you. I have so many that I'm going over. I'm trying to compile a list of different books to read so that we can share the information with everybody. I had so many tabs open on my computer researching, even just this episode.
Yeah.
Because every time an event happens, I was like, oh, great, got to click on another link.
Yep. Ooh, this is interesting. Ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy.
Ooh, piece of lore. Ooh, piece of lore.
All right, welcome to Talk About Tatooine. I'm Andrew.
I'm Nathan.
And we're twin brothers here to bring you what's new in nerddom and give colorful commentary on our favorite subjects. Welcome to our cantina. Grab a drink and settle in as we set course for realities beyond our own.
Welcome to episode 77. Today's recording date is June 29th, and this episode will be released on Monday, July 1st. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on Roboute Guilliman. Stick around towards the end of the episode. We just have a few points of nerd news to share as well. We're going to start off with where we left off. Andrew, go ahead and lead us in.
We're 20 minutes into the episode, and we're just now starting. What?
The people have stuff to say.
What accent should I read this blurb?
You should not read this in an accent. I will cut out everything you say if you read this in an accent. Boy, I have a lot to do today. I will not be tested. I will up your
Oh my gosh.
Ladies and gentlemen, Horus is dead.
He's gonna kill me. Okay, where we left off. Horus is dead. The legions of the War Master have marched on Terra and have been driven back. By all accounts, the true loyal sons of the Emperor should have perished, with so many of their allies being galaxies apart, unable to participate at the Battle of Terra. The Blood Angels and the White Scars stood indomitable alongside the Imperial Fists, amassing feats of heroism at every turn. Sanguinius himself was said to have fought off a sea of demons, attempting to break the Emperor's focus as the war in the webway raged on. But the angel could foresee his fate, and his death would not be at the hands, teeth, or claws of the demonic host, but that of his own brother Horus. Horus himself would slay the angel, and with his sacrifice provide a way for the Emperor to put down his mongrel son Horus. With the fleets of Horus in disarray after the death of their leader, their desire to kill and burn and defile was without aim, and the psychic wrath that had eliminated Horus had also banished the demons, bolstering the traitor ranks. The siege of Terra is over, and the wolves of Russ, Dark Angels, and Guilliman's own Ultramarines arrive literally hours later. The remaining forces on the surface of Terra turned the traitor retreat into a rout and then into a slaughter, as the Sons of the Angel were engulfed by the Black Rage and driven to madness by the psychic death scream of their Primarch. This was the legacy, the remnant of the Imperium left to Roboute Guilliman.
Keep in mind here, guys, it is considered, like, once we get into our next portion, which is the Great Scouring, the Imperium is considered to be basically a burning dumpster fire because of the civil war that has gone on. Now, keep in mind, the Great
100%.
Scouring does take like several years to actually complete. I think it's like close to like 7 years or something. Basically, all of the legions like push them off of Terra, but then the legions continue to kind of spread out on their own campaigns. So keep that in mind as we go through this next portion.
If you guys can comment down below in GIF form, how would you describe the Imperium of Man right after the battle or the Siege of Terra? GIFs only.
To do just a quick roll call of the surviving command structure, the commanders of the Scouring were the surviving Primarchs, Guilliman, Rogaldorn, Leman Russ, Jagatai Khan, Vulcan, and Korvax. Bring me to life, Korax. Who the wrote that?
You didn't read all my notes. I said Jagatai, the Khan, Vulcan, and Corvus, bring me to life, Korvax.
Korax.
Frick!
I it up. Yeah, you did. So in the opposite corner of the ring, the forces of chaos include Mortarion, Perturabo, Fulgrim, Magnus the Red, Angron, Conrad Cruz, Lorgar, and Omegon. I guess Alfarius, depending on which one you think died at the hands of Dorn and the Horus Heresy.
Personally, I think both of them still could be running around. That's like the whole point of the Alpha Legion, is that like they could die and we actually wouldn't know. But it's pretty likely that Dorn does actually kill one of them.
Interesting fact is every time a Primarch dies, there is this like psychic emanation, and that psychic emanation is actually documented in the battle for Pluto when Dorn kills Alfarius or Omegon. I'm not sure which one it is. So that I think is like pretty high on the confirmation, like 95% sure that one of the Primarchs died, is because there was that psychic emanation, and his brother like felt that. He was like, shit, somebody died. Because we see the same thing happen with Ferris. Like when he gets beheaded, there's a kind of this psychic emanation, and even those soldiers that did not see him get beheaded knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And that's also why the forces of the Salamanders constantly say Vulcan lives, Vulcan lives, Vulcan lives, because there was not that psychic emanation that like confirmed it in their like hearts and minds that they knew he was dead, because he's an immortal and he kept coming back. So he wasn't like fully dead. That's kind of my theory of what's happening. I actually originally heard that theory a long time ago on, I think, actually a Major Kill video. That's kind of a point I would throw out there as well. But again, we don't know which one is dead. And it's the Alpha Legion. Everything is up in the air. It is important to know that Abaddon is also still running around in this as well, considering he will eventually take up the claw. But that's an entire episode when we like really dive into Abaddon the Despoiler, the Black Crusades, all of that. We're going to mention the Black Crusades, specifically the 13th one, here in just a bit. There's a lot going on before we get there. So consider this, guys. The Scouring was a massive counteroffensive brought on by the reinforcements of the Ultramarines and the other legions once they got to Terra, seeing Horus's forces scattered and cut off at the head. So they were trying to capitalize as much as they can. And again, RG, being kind of the commander and statesman he is, takes a very, very large role in driving back the forces of chaos into the Eye of Terror. The attempt at a quick beheading of the Imperium did backfire, essentially, when Horus attacked. His whole strategy basically revolved on, we're going to hit Terra so hard, kill the Emperor, and we're going to win. And then we'll just be able to pick up the pieces because everyone's going to be disarray. Basically, that doesn't work. And all the rest of the traitor primarchs are like, hey, man, what the hell? And then they basically get pushed back. Most of the legions fought on different fronts during the Scouring as to take back all the space taken by chaos as quickly as possible. Worlds that were associated with the fallen legions were scoured of all life, including Istavan. So we get a lot of different, basically, fighting across the galaxy, and legions are starting to scatter during this, especially on the Siege of Terra. I haven't read that series yet. I'm like working there, but it's understood that the Emperor's children specifically were kind of just being the Emperor's children and being gross during the Siege of Terra. So they still had a lot of forces left, which we will definitely get into in just a little bit.
You could say they were caught with their pants down.
Yes, they're being nasty, which is interesting because at this point, I think the only primarchs that had ascended to demonhood were Angron, Lorgar, Horus, and Fulgrim, correct? Like they had all...
Mortarion.
Mortarion had become a demon primarch as well?
Basically, right before the Battle of Terra, Mortarion succumbs to the Grandfather.
Do we know when Magnus becomes a demon primarch? I don't know that off the top of my head of like timing when that happens.
I'm not 100% sure. I don't even know which book it would have happened in. I think it happens sometime. I mean, it has to happen sometime after the burning of Prospero because he's not a demon primarch then. But he's so, like, at some point, by the time the Siege of Terra happens, I do believe he is the demon primarch of Tzeentch.
I'm doing a quick scan of the wiki.
Yeah, because they got Tzeentch, Khorne, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. Yeah, so all of the chaos deities are represented in their champions at the Siege of Terra.
Yes.
And they still lose.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It's bonkers. It just goes to show like how amazing of a defender Rogel Dorn was.
Yeah.
/ is. He's alive. What do we say? If there's not a body, they're not actually dead.
No, never. We'll have to get to that in another episode, guys, when we cover other Primarchs. I actually love Magnus. I think he's like really, really cool, but I don't know enough about him yet. And that's why we do these episodes, is so that we can learn along with you guys all of the specifics. Essentially what happens, where we're at right now, is the Horus Heresy is getting completely, it's over at this point. We're in the Great Scouring, and this fighting is going on for years and years. And the Ultramarines actually end up into a conflict at the Battle of Thessala against the Emperor's children in the year 31,121. It's very specific. So this is actually when Roboute Guilliman was mortally wounded via a slice to the neck via tainted blade by Fulgrim.
So at this point, the tainted blade is said to be similar to the anatheme that actually slew Horus not at Davin, I guess before Davin. Davin is where he's resurrected, because it's the Davinite priests that do their thing. An interesting note, before the battle, the captain of his second company, Aenid Thiel, even questioned that he would not win the contest of might against Fulgrim and urged his Primarch not to partake in this fight. He said, you're not going to win. It would later be recounted that Captain Thiel would be one of the Space Marines to actually rescue their mortally wounded Primarch from the depths of the Pride of the Emperor, which is Fulgrim's ship, in a desperate escape attempt via teleportation. We know very little about what happened after Fulgrim slew Guilliman, but what we do know is that the first and second companies were basically decimated. 10,000 years would pass, Guilliman would awaken, and he would find that Thiel had perished sometime after the battle with little record to his own legacy. Roboute knew exactly the risk and heroism that Thiel had exercised to save his life, only for his second company captain to be forgotten all but to time.
To preserve the Primarch, he was put into a stasis chamber and brought to Mercrag and was actually laid there for 10,000 years. While this is all happening, the Imperium basically switches from the Imperial Truth into the Imperial Cult, and RG becomes essentially a pilgrimage destination for devotees to come see the body of the holy son of the God Emperor. This is so antithetical to what he's about. He picks his battles, essentially. He's not thrilled when he wakes up to
No.
see what he sees. The Imperium is in flames in a lot of different areas. There's a new, basically, warp storm covering everything. And everyone's like, hey, we kind of like semi worship you and your dad. You're really cool.
It should be noted as well in the flashback portion of Dark Imperium, the first book written by Guy Haley, that the new Marines under his command, as he's about to take his assault onto Pride of the Emperor, that Guilliman is actually noting that his more newer recruits and his new veterans, I should say, because so many of them perished during the Horus Heresy, that they're increasingly more fanatical. That there's that the imperial cult has already started to take over basically as soon as the emperor dies.
What a shame.
Yeah, he basically, he's like, even though I've spent the last, like, millennia or so preaching the imperial truth, for lack of a better words, it's the imperial cult that eventually does take over, and they're like, no, the emperor is a god.
Which I think is interesting. I don't want to say the Emperor's a god, because I actually think the Emperor's like deranged and loony, like on the Golden Throne. I think he's like completely lost it. I think he's still a tremendous source of psychic power. Imagine how Guilliman feels, because Guilliman starts to, in some of these like future conflicts we'll talk about, he starts to encounter living saints, and he's like, what the hell, guys? Like, what is this? Like, can you imagine that? Like, he wakes up and he's like, guys, what's going on with these shiny ladies? I'm not really sure what's going on here. They're like, oh, we're embodied by the power of your father. He's a god now. And I can just imagine him just like pinching his brow, just being like, guys, come on.
I could almost make the opposite argument that the emperor is a god when he stole power from chaos, because that's how he became truly his, like, quote unquote final form, not his corpse form on the golden throne. His final form that fights Horus, like, he stole that power from the chaos gods, and I think in a way became a god himself.
Yes. Well, there's also that prevailing theory that the Horus Heresy was all engineered so that he could ascend. You know, they might be onto something here.
Right, because there's that weird, like, Eldar cabal that is like exactly these amount of events need to happen. It's like Doctor Strange in Endgame or whatever, and he's like, there's only one way, and the cabal is like, there's only one way. We need Horus to be bad, but we need him to die, and we need the Emperor to only be mostly dead.
No, I think it was the goal of the Cabal to actually kill the Emperor, because
Oh,
they knew if Horus won, then they would extinguish themselves due to infighting, because the Chaos Gods can't agree on anything. Then once their
right,
objective was essentially gone, they would infight. The galaxy would essentially be on fire, but it would be a fire that essentially burned up all of its fuel.
right.
This Eldar group called the Cabal was like, hey, we actually need everything to die so that we can eventually extinguish chaos. Because think the flood in Halo. The way they kill the
Gotcha.
flood is not by fighting the flood, it's actually by removing all of its food. And that's essentially what they were trying to do. They're trying to remove the food from the galaxy for the Chaos Gods,
Oh,
which
damn.
was everything that wasn't Eldar.
Oh no, we're just food again.
Again, exactly. So
Which is going to be a very common theme once we talk about the fourth tyrannic war. We are food.
I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. I just finished reading Leviathan. I have so many notes.
So I know I need to get that in, go through that. So that's going to be a fun one. Coming up next, guys, we're going to talk about the resurrection of RG. Now, the interesting thing is that RG actually tasked Belisarius Cawl, who's the Archmagos at this time, to basically say, hey, I'm going to go fight Fulgrim, but I'm probably going to die. I need you to make sure that I stay alive and then resurrect me when I die. He set that into motion before all of that happened. And I think enough people died that no one really knows that this was happening, because when he gets found out, Belisarius Cawl basically gets put on blast. And he's like, hey, by the way, guys, I'm actually like 10,000 years old. And RG himself told me to resurrect him. And they were like, super sus. but we're going to let it happen. Essentially, what happens is that at the end of the 13th Black Crusade, Guilliman was resurrected. Now, what happens is Belisarius Cawl makes this suit of armor. The suit of armor itself, though, is not sufficient to bring back Guilliman. Now, we're going to talk about the Black Crusade because this actually has quite a bit to do here. The forces of the Black Legion actually destroy the craft world of Bealtan. Now, that's important because Bealtan is like one of the biggest Eldar factions at the time, and they're very like focused on fighting, and they are big, big, big enemies of chaos. However, their craft world basically gets blown up. I don't exactly know how it happens. I'm literally reading that from the wiki. So I apologize, guys, that I do not have more details.
If you guys know which book that happens in the comments, please hit us up because I would like to check it out from my local library and give it a read. Thank you very much.
So at this point, the Eldar need help. Even though these are like kind of a really warlike and fanatical group of Eldar, they're like, hey, we have to ally with the Imperium. We have to be allies with the Imperium of Man if we plan on surviving. Cawl has this suit of armor that is planning on keeping Guilliman alive, but they need mystical intervention. So basically, a priestess, Yvraine, basically helps Cawl to channel the power of Enid, which is an Eldar god, into Guilliman to bring him back.
Isn't Enid like the Eldar goddess of death or something?
I think so. Again, haven't dove into that because that was another like 3 tabs away from my original thing. You can track it all back. It all comes back to Roboute Guilliman, but it's like I had so many tabs open and we only have so much time to talk.
Every one of these episodes, it becomes an absolute rabbit hole. Like having to like pull myself out, being like, I am like 7 steps removed from like Roboute Guilliman, like our original topic. I'm like reading about how the orcs can just like think of stuff and they all have like nascent like warp abilities and nothing to do with Space Marines.
All that fun stuff. Basically, keep in mind, guys, that every time we write one of these episodes, we get sidetracked at least like 20 times. So just to quickly summarize, the 13th Black Crusade famously was the one that split Cadia big boom. However, Abaddon receives a prophecy that Belisarius Cawl was on Macragge and had a weapon to push them back. So he sent forces to attack Ultramar. Abaddon at this point does not know that this weapon that Belisarius Cawl is trying to bring into existence is actually Roboute Guilliman. So he's trying, like Belisarius Cawl is trying to resurrect him, and then Abaddon gets word via a chaos prophecy that like something big is coming back, and he's like, hey, we just blew up Cadia, but now we need to attack Ultramar. Guilliman basically wakes up just in time to see the fortress of Hera basically being swarmed by Black Legion forces, and specifically the shrine that he was in as well. Enraged that the traitors were on his homeworld, RG slaughters every single Black Legionary that was in the shrine of Guilliman. Kills every single one of them. Goes hog wild. At this point, the Ultramar campaign was stalled and pushed back. RG needed to get back to Terra.
So it was kind of a difficult time that Roboute would get from Macragge back to Terra. It wasn't just like a short hop, skip, and a jump. It actually would become known as the Terran Crusade. And Roboute Guillisuit would end up going toe-to-toe with Magnus. So he's basically hopping from Primarch to Primarch. The Imperial forces are attacked also by Kairos Fateweaver, which is the greater demon of Tzeentch, and the Red Corsairs. Roboute Guilliman becomes imprisoned in the Blackstone Fortress and is actually rescued by a Harlequin. Oh, Lord, how am I going to pronounce this? Salandri Veilwalker and Cypher, of all people. How fascinating. Secrets upon secrets, I do say myself.
Before you continue reading, the cipher point got me because I was reading through that and I was like, is that the cipher I think it is?
It's the cipher.
It's the cipher from the Dark Angels. And that was another whole rabbit hole. I spent like 15 minutes reading like up on his history. And then I finally got back and I was like, what have I done? I have too much information in my head about Warhammer and I'm trying to write about RG and I'm just like, I can't even, it took me a while to refocus. Anyways, continue.
Dude, Cypher's a weird guy. The more I read about Cypher, the less I understand his character. Anyways, Guillisuit even defeats Scarbrand, which is the greater demon of Khorne, I believe.
Yes.
On their way out towards the Webway. He's a bloodthirster demon. The Imperial forces exit the Webway on Luna, followed by Magnus. The two end up dueling, and Guilliman only survives Magnus's psychic might due to the Silent Sisters from Terra. So if you guys don't know who the Silent Sisters are, in the tabletop game, they're actually a sub-faction of the Adeptus Custodes, and what they are known as is their psychic nulls. So what that means is they project a space around them to where the warp cannot operate. Think of Islamari from Star Wars. They create a bubble in which the force cannot exist.
I love that there's going to be maybe like two people who are like, yeah, the Islamari, right?
They're like, I 100% knew that reference.
Yeah, most of you guys might not know that is specifically brought into Legends via Thrawn in his storyline, because he uses the Islamari to combat Jedi forces as he's fighting off rebels.
But, fun fact, he also has a wood carving of Islamari in his office on his ship, the Chimera, in Star Wars Rebels.
Yes, so a little homage to Legends in Star Wars Rebels. So they're canon, but they're not. The use of Islamari are not canon, but the existence of Islamari are canon. Yeah.
They seem to be an in-canon legend.
Yes.
Because we don't actually know if they truly exist. Anyway.
Back to Warhammer.
Then we move on to the Primaris project.
All of this combat, or all of these counterattacks only succeed because Guilliman himself comes back with a bunch of Primaris Marines. Essentially, Call was also appointed to make an upgrade to the Space Marines. Roboute Guilliman knew that they were going to need better Marines, which is a wild piece of insight that he was like, hey, this is not going to go super well. We need upgrades. And so he does that. He sends the upgrades and comes back, and that's the only reason they all survived. The Imperium would not have survived without Primaris support, especially when they get into the Indominus Crusade. Magnus does survive the battle with RG. That should be noted. He does get pushed back off of Luna, not without getting impaled, though. He gets real stabbed from RG, does not die, because that would be too easy, and that would be a plot point way too simple for Warhammer.
It's not his time to die.
Exactly. If he'll ever die.
That is a very common thing among the Primarchs is, I've been wounded. Guess I'll leave now. Why it was so shocking to me when I read the Istvan drop site massacre for the first time and Ferrus Manus gets beheaded. Oh my gosh, he's actually dead. They killed a Primarch. He's dead. Oh my gosh. I was like, they killed one. They actually killed one.
Yeah, basically you have to separate the brain from the body for anything to actually work, which I'm not sure if that would work with Vulcan. It's kind of like Deadpool. If you separate his bodies, but you don't completely atomize him, does he technically come back? Maybe? Sort of, yes. But there's no record of Vulcan being beheaded that I know of. But also, if you beheaded Vulcan and you put his body and his head back together, would he then come back?
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. So kind of wild. While all of this is going down, Khorne is basically ready to break some heads. So the 13th Black Crusade is attacking Ultramar. Ultramar then gets pushed back by Roboute Guilliman. Roboute Guilliman is going through the webway or is going back to Terra and is intercepted by Magnus. He is then captured, released, goes back to Luna via the webway because of the Harlequins. Then from here, he basically shows up in the solar system, and Terra's under attack again. Khorne does not give a about the other chaos deities. He's like, warp storms can now happen over Terra because of the Great Rift, because of what Abaddon did over Acadia, because of the giant rift that's now in the galaxy. And he's like, hold my axe. Like, let's go. We're going to attack Terra again. So Battle of the Lion's Gate is actually essentially an additional part of the second Battle of Terra. Khorne leads an assault on Terra with 8 bloodthirsters. So he sicks 8 bloodthirsters and chaos demons all down on Terra. And basically he's like, this is my time to shine. I got this. Because there's no one there other than the Custodes to hold me back. While this is happening, there's a warp storm going on around Terra. RG gets to the moon, survives a battle with Magnus, gets pushed back, looks at Terra and was like, oh, we should probably do something. And then RG comes back with Primaris reinforcements and actually pushes the forces of Khorne off of Terra. It is also an important factoid here. Trajan Valorous, how do you say it?
Valorous,
thank you. leads 4,000 custodies into battle here, along with Silent Sisters and forces of the Grey Knights. He loses half of his custodies. 2,000 custodies die in this. And that reaction you had right there, that cringe of like, what just happened, is exactly what you should feel, because custodies are so valuable to the Imperium and half of them are dead. Another fun fact though is Khorne is so mad that this assault fails. Again, he's watching from his skull throne. He's not actually participating. It would be below a chaos deity to actually attack a planet directly. That's not what they do. He obliterates all 8 bloodthirsters because they failed. He smites every single one of them because they never actually took Terra. They never reached the Eternity Gate, and they weren't able to win because RG pushed them all back. Pretty dang wild.
I never knew about the Second Battle of Terra, so I'm going to have to do some reading.
Dude, my list of books is like this long right now. I have so many books I have to read. And that's, again, guys, that's why we do a Warhammer podcast, is because there's so many details to go over. We're at minute 53 of raw recording time, and we've actually not really talked about Guilliman all that much, but we're talking about the events that are surrounding his resurrection. Lots of stuff going on. Andrew, do you have any notes?
I don't, other than in the next week's episode, we're going to talk a lot about the Indomitus Crusade. We're going to be talking about the Plague Wars, and we're going to be talking about Guilliman's interactions with some of the other primarchs. I should say the surviving traitor primarchs. We will be doing a 3rd episode on Roboute Guilliman. I mean, at this point, are we looking at a 4th? Maybe, maybe not.
I would say it wouldn't necessarily be a 4th episode, but we will do an episode that leads into the 4th Tyrannic War, which will essentially, we're doing all of this in lead up to Space Marine 2. So that will kind of get us to the current setting and what's happening with Guilliman. So just some notes from our last episode as well here, guys. If you guys haven't seen the gameplay trailer for Space Marine 2 yet, it released on the 20th of June, so just about 9 days ago. You guys should really check it out. There's a lot of good breakdowns for that trailer. If you guys aren't familiar, Chapter Master Valorak has done quite a few breakdowns of that trailer and gives pretty updated news bits on that. Really fun guy to watch. I do highly recommend going and subscribing to his channel as well. That's actually where I have gotten a decent amount of my news from, what the goings on are for the Warhammer universe. A little bit of news from the HoloNet, mostly based around Space Marine 2, is the Space Marine 2 beta has actually been scrapped. The devs over at Focus Entertainment were like, hey, we're actually focusing on the game release right now to try to get the release on time and to run the beta and get all of the feedback we would get from that would be too laborious. And so they actually scrapped it. Although I was a little irritated at some of the articles that I read because they wrote this as like something malicious that Focus Entertainment was doing to us as the gamers. And I'm like, this is what we want from game developers, is if something is not ready, or if it's going to hamper the quality of the final product or push it back, and they're like, hey, we can launch this on time if we cancel the beta. Basically, I read some notes or some news pieces that were saying that they pulled the rug out from under gamers. And I was like, that's kind of a malicious way of viewing a game developer that hasn't done anything wrong and just wants their product to be good. Now, I'm being an apologist here. Maybe I'm wrong. If the game sucks when it comes out in September, well, then we'll know in hindsight that the beta should have happened, so we would have had that feedback. That's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. They're essentially taking out a step of quality review in order to make sure that the game is going to be ready. But the thing is, if the game isn't ready for beta, then they shouldn't release it, right? And the thing is like, as a gameplay community, a beta is not something we're entitled to.
No, it's not. It's not the MO for developers. Not every game has. Most games don't have betas.
Most games don't have betas. I feel like that's completely within their rights to say like, hey, this is a stage of development that we're gonna skip. That's within their rights to do that. And it could pay off, but it also may not. And we know that it's a risk. It is for sure a risk, because actually beta testing a game is very useful for game development, because you gain magnitudes more data than actual quality assurance testing can be done internally. Because quality assurance testing on video games is not really what it sounds like. It is people doing kind of the same thing over and over again to try and see if bugs happen. It's not people naturally playing the game. They're kind of given scripts, and they're said to, hey, do this level, do this one spot, and just do it over and over and over again. Whereas when you have a beta, you have people who are doing whatever they possibly can, and there are some people who are just like, yeah, I'm just going to try to do the dumbest stuff I can possibly think of. And that's, that's useful feedback for the game too, because there's those players who are like, hey, I'm going to find every exploit I absolutely can, and that's really important for developers because they need to patch those out.
Absolutely.
It's a risk. I would like to see Space Marine released on time. It does worry me that them scrapping the beta is going to affect an on-time game release.
I'm choosing to be optimistic here. The game is still set to release on September 9th. Hopefully it will stay that way. I would be really upset if it didn't release on time, but we have said on the podcast before, if games get delayed, that's usually for good reason, because we've seen games get released too early and they have been hot garbage, and it takes too long for games to actually get up to the point where they're fully playable, and by that point you've lost all momentum, and it's basically like a scratch. Like it's no good.
For sure.
We here at Talk About Tatooine do encourage delays when they're necessary for product quality.
Yes, and while that really sucks, because like I'm really excited for Space Marine 2.
I mean, we're counting on this to be in our stream schedule. Like that's again, why we're doing all of this in the podcast, and like why we're focusing our episodes around the Ultramarines, Roboute Guilliman, is like so that we can get an idea of what is going on right now and where we're leading up to in the Fourth Tyrannic War.
Yeah, and with that too, like we have taken PTO to play this game. It's
It's gonna be good.
I'm using my adult benefits to play a video game
100%.
because as is my right to do so.
100%.
So yeah, I'm hopeful that Saber Interactive and Focus Entertainment are making the right decision to release a quality game on time.
Agreed.
I would have loved to play the beta. Don't get me wrong. I got to play, things like the Stormgate beta, and I really enjoyed it. But at the end of the day, the full game is really what it's about.
Indeed. I forgot about Stormgate. Some additional news we have about Space Marine 2 is we got some additional details from last week's gameplay trailer. Confirmed, we have 3 game modes so far for the player versus player modes. We have a TDM, or a team deathmatch mode, where you're just trying to see who gets to a kill count faster. Domination, which is an area control across multiple sites along a map, and a King of the Hill mode, which is usually a moving domination style. So we have those 3 modes, which is going to be very fun.
Domination and King of the Hill are my favorite game modes of all time. TDM, honestly, pretty boring for the most part. I get, okay, like I want an objective. Domination and King of the Hill really allow players, or for combat, to be a little bit more dynamic. And especially with the level of vertical play that things like the jetpack are going to allow you to traverse the map and really kind of dominate the skies and get in quick. I think it's going to be a ton of fun.
Absolutely. And finally, we did find out that Space Marine 2 will have dedicated servers for specific regions, including North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania.
Perfect.
Hopefully that will keep ping levels nice and low.
So like we said, everyone, please follow our Twitch and or our TikTok. That is where we live stream. So when Space Marine 2 is eventually released in September, that is where we're going to go live, and we're going to be streaming the crap out of it.
Absolutely. Quick thank you to all of our patrons here, guys. Mike, Isaac, David, and Calmbrew. You guys are all of our biggest supporters right now. You guys are the reasons we do what we do, and honestly, have been a delight to chat with. Keep in mind here, guys, which for just $5 a month, you can support us here at Talk About Tatooine, so we can do more awesome things like giveaways, which is currently going on. Guys, we've talked about our lightsaber giveaway so many times. If you support us on Patreon, Twitch, or over on Etsy, that gets you entries to win a lightsaber. Please do that. We're drawing in August. Thank you all again from the bottom of our hearts. We are super happy to have you guys all here. Currently, our Patreon is offering digital goods such as emotes for our personal Discord servers, access to game nights, which actually we did technically last night. We did a patron stream. We did some Gears of War, and we did that with our patrons and mods, which was quite a bit of fun. Make sure you guys do that. We have lots of fun stuff. I think I had more written down somewhere, but it wasn't up to date, so I had to delete some of it. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Every single one of you guys watching is amazing. Make sure to leave your theories in the comments, share pictures of your models on Twitter and Instagram, and shoot us an email at talkabouttatooine@gmail.com if you have questions you want featured on air. Make sure to subscribe over on YouTube and like this video so that the algorithmic overlords will slice this video into the feeds of other like-minded folks. And until next time, Roboute Guilliman protects.
You said reboot a lot.
Is that bad?
It's Roboute.
Roboute. Until next time, Robot Duckman protects.
Gosh. I mean, his name is so stupid you can say it however you want. But I was just wondering, I was like, I wonder if he actually knows it's Roboute and not Reboot.
Dude, I hate saying Roboute. I feel silly and stupid saying Roboute.
Roboute!
It's way too high gothic.